Welcome to the Enchanted Ears podcast,
where we discuss anything and everything Disney.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Joe, and on today's episode, we're going to look at how Disney may have been different if Euro Disney had succeeded.
Yeah, this is a very interesting take on sort of if things had gone differently, how would Disney have been impacted overall as a company? So, Euro Disney was not very successful. We're definitely going to talk a lot about that. But because of that, they sort of had to pour some money and resources into trying to help it out. And there were a lot of projects that kind of fell to the back burner and then eventually were not carried through because of this, lack of success with Euro Disney.
Yeah, there were some grand plans in the 90s that a lot of it all kind of fizzled out. And you can really tie back to the financial kind of failures of Euro Disney in the early 90s. So we'll get into that, but before we do, let's cover the Disney news of the week. Few pieces of Disney news because Disney had their investor day, I think. So there is always some news being announced and some new stuff being announced during the investor day. One thing they announced is that they're making Coco 2. What I find interesting is they're announcing it now because the movie's not scheduled to come out until 2029. So it's 4 years away, which it's don't you have anything closer that you could announce? It seems crazy. And I know these animated movies take a long time, but going 4 years out to announce a movie is pretty crazy.
Especially when you think about how, was it Universal, Nintendo? I don't know exactly who's going to be the person who puts it out. Just announced a live action Zelda movie.
Oh yeah,
and that's coming out in 2027. So that's 2 years sooner.
That's in coordination with Nintendo. So I don't know if it's under Illumination, but that's technically owned by Universal. Same thing what they did with the Super Mario movie.
Right.
They're kind of doing Zelda now.
So Disney's announcing a movie 2 years even further out than that. And I do think that this is a way. I know that Coco is insanely popular in the parks. And it makes a lot of sense. So I get it. I think they want to say, hey, the story isn't over. Hey, you're going to get to, the one thing that Coco is not my favorite Disney property of all time, or even close to my favorite. However, the world, I can't remember what the world is called when they go.
Cross the bridge. And that's
when they cross the bridge.
What's the story? Why are they going back there? Because that is an insane world to kind of see.
Right. And so for that reason, I am excited because I just remember watching that, my jaw hit the floor, kind of when Finding Nemo came out. Even though I didn't love it the first time I saw it, I was just wow, this looks incredible and the colors are so bright, and Coco is very much like that. So, I'm cautiously optimistic. However, that is really far down the road.
Yeah, really, really far down the road. You feel like they could have just re-announced we're making another Frozen movie.
Yeah.
And gotten people just as excited. They would have forgotten they already announced it. So moving over to the parks, the new lounge in Spaceship Earth is going to be called Geo 82. This is going to be an adult-only lounge that is going to be opening in Spaceship Earth sometime this year. Looks very upscale, high-end. Disney seems to kind of be going all in on these lounge spaces now. They're building a lot of these DVC lounges. One just opened a DVC lounge in the Magic Kingdom. They have one in Epcot. They're building, this adult-only lounge. So they kind of seem to see, hey, people like these bar lounge areas, maybe places where there aren't kids, kind of now catering to more adults in the park. So this will be interesting to see, once it finally opens, how expansive is the menu? How hard is it to get into? That sort of thing.
I'm very curious the thought process behind this, because you got to think, is this because there is a large number of adults that go without children and there's that demand for a space?
Especially in Epcot. Especially in Epcot, I feel that's the park sense. Where it's a lot of adults. You're going, food and wine, that sort of thing. Having an additional space. Yeah. It seems to make sense.
It's just interesting to limit it to people who are going there without children. Because again, we don't have kids. I don't expect there to be anywhere in Disney World that go without children. That is just part of, my expectation when I'm there. And part of it, honestly, is part of the kids can be a little on the annoying side, but also they can be, you just casually observing a family or a child meeting a character that they're excited about. It adds a little bit to the experience. So I don't know, that thought process behind that is really interesting to me.
Yeah, and again, I don't know how many people this is gonna like serve at a time. Like it's
Yeah.
probably pretty small. It's probably gonna be tough to get into, so it's not a huge market. But like they have that space in Spaceship Earth, because I think that used to be an old like corporate lounge. Like I know there's a corporate lounge above Test Track. I don't know if GM still owns that technically. If not, maybe that'll be another lounge in there. So interesting to see, yeah, kind of how this goes. Now some negative news at the parks over in DCA Avengers Campus. The Avengers Stunt Show is closing, and this is something we've kind of talked about a lot with Avengers Campus, that like it's not living up to its potential because it's relying so much on live entertainment. And we've always talked about this. Anytime there's a slowdown, the first thing Disney cuts is live entertainment. So if you look at Avengers Campus, when it opened, you had the Avengers Stunt Show, you had the Spider-Man Stunt Show, you had the Doctor Strange Show, and you have the Dora Milaje. So the Doctor Strange Show closed last year, I think. Nothing has replaced it. The Spider-Man Stunt Show, they still do the animatronic, but they do not have a character come out and do stunts beforehand. So that's pared down. Now the Avengers Stunt Show is closing, and the Dora Milaje is still there. I think they might have cut back the number of performances, though. So basically, all the live entertainment is gone out of that land, which now it's like, what's the point of going there?
Yep.
There's 2 rides, they're okay, but there's not really much to do else in that land. It's interesting that they're closing it. They're not announcing anything new. I wonder if some of this is because of the construction of the new attractions, and they're going to be working in those buildings, and so they can't have the stunt performers. That's maybe the optimistic side of me thinking like, hey, there's an actual reason for this. I think probably the actual reason is people, they don't think it's as popular as it used to be. They don't want to have to pay these stunt performers because they're probably some of the highest paid cast members in terms of live performance. So let's cut it and save some money.
Yeah, I mean, interesting to know the thought process there. I do think, yeah, we've talked about this a lot, how it is so reliant over there on live performances. And honestly, like for me, the Spider-Man show and the Dora are the 2 most exciting things. They've already toyed with and edited that Spider-Man performance. And now, I mean, I just hope they don't ever touch the Dora Milaje. I just think that is so powerful, and it creates a certain life to, like, it adds a certain life to the campus that, you know, as they are starting to pare these back, every time they peel it back, it's just going to get smaller and smaller and less exciting and less exciting. So unless this new ride that they're going to be coming out with is just like a banger, I know that like people have their feelings about the Spider-Man ride. Web slingers, like I know there's people that like it a lot, and I think a lot of people are like, dude, that's too much work. I've seen people say that. I like it, but again, it's not a ride that I have to get on every time. So they need a ride over there that you have to get on every single time to draw people in.
Yeah, and the new attraction is years away still. So it's like, are you going to go years without any performances? Like nothing has replaced the Doctor Strange show. I'm glad they're still doing Spider-Man. You really go for the animatronic. The stunt performances before that, they were okay, but like it kind of varied depending on how good your performer was, depending on what stunts they did. So, you know, I like that they still have the animatronic, but I have to think the Dora Milaje show is not safe. I mean, the fact that everything else has been canceled out of there, I would not be surprised if that goes shortly too.
Do you happen to know? I mean, I'm guessing. Like, I haven't really kept up on this. I've fallen, you know, I used to get all kinds of Disney news on my Instagram, and now it's moved over to book news because I've been reading Fourth Wing. But or the Deadpool show is over. That was just that was a limited time thing. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So like that's not there either.
Yeah, and maybe they'll pop up with more limited time shows, but yeah, it seems odd. Like there's no set shows there anymore. And the last thing I want to mention that Bob Iger mentioned during the investment call and conference that they had, and this is a quote that Disney Parks put out, which I think is just crazy. Like, why are they doing this? It's a picture of Figment. It says Figment News. And it says, quote from Bob Iger, "I'm going to ask our creative team to make some short form videos of Figment." What does that even mean? Like, I saw this picture of Figment as I'm scrolling from Disney Parks. I'm like, what's happening? Figment ride getting updated? Is the Figment meet and greet finally going to come to the parks that they announced, I feel like 6 years ago with the Dreamfinder? Like, what's the big news? And the news is he's going to ask them to make short form videos of Figment. What does that mean for the parks, for Disney Plus? Like, I mean, come on, Disney. This is really stretching the definition of Figment news.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I'm hoping that these are cartoons, and I hope it's a very cartoonified version because, again, the cartoon version, not that live action creepy thing that they have.
We know how you feel about Figment.
Yeah, but like the cartoon version of him is adorable. So I want to see more of that version of Figment out in the world because, I mean, dragons, again, dragons.
Yeah,
very topical, very
I
timely.
Do think this is more for like a Disney Plus, like a shorts
That was my thought.
That's what, from like reading more about it after, it does seem like that. But again, it just seems like a weird thing for them to like very publicly push out a quote that just generically, I'm going to ask them to make short videos of Figment.
I do have to wonder too if they're going to create. I mean, I say if, and this is a very like soft if, because I think that this is just something that was said. Like I don't think that this is. I don't see this materializing.
Figment stuff.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Well, yeah, he just said I'm going to ask them to do it.
Yeah.
He could be like, well, I said no.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I just feel like this is like we got to say something. So we'll say this because everyone loves, like, people love Figment. But they also have to watch The Voice because, again, when I'm riding the Figment ride, I'm like, whoo, I don't think I could listen to him talk for too long.
I think we could get Chris Pratt to voice him.
I think he voices everybody.
Yeah, isn't he like,
you know what?
Mario,
No.
Garfield?
No. We just
everybody.
we just get Jim Cummings or Alan Tudyk to do it.
Yeah, one of the
two of them, they can do it. I believe in them.
Yeah, those would be good options. But again, never said that Figment was going to talk in these videos. So he just said short videos of Figment. It could just be Figment sitting there eating a salad. We have no idea.
That would actually be really
just Figment
cute.
Doing mundane things, and
that
he never
would be
talks.
Pretty cute.
So
I
who
would
knows?
like that.
Who knows? We'll see. We'll see what happens. But yeah, just really, really interesting like news blast that they shot out there last week. So all right, so let's get into our main topic. So looking at Euro Disney, which is now known as Disneyland Paris. So this was all kind of part of Michael Eisner's like Disney decade expansion. So he kind of dubbed the 90s the Disney decade expansion. It was this whole idea that Disney was going to add new attractions and new shows every year. I actually found an article from the early 90s that basically quoted Michael Eisner and Disney as saying their plan at Disneyland, at least to kind of revitalize Disneyland, was a new attraction or show every year through the mid-90s. And then they were going to build a Hollywood land at Disneyland, which was actually going to have a copy of the Great Movie Ride in like 1999, as I think what the planned opening for that was.
I feel like some of the best Disney CEOs are like that. It's like that Batman, adage from the end of The Dark Knight, where it's like you either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Like, because you think about it, like everything that happened, in the 90s was all like under Eisner, and that was like some of the best that Disney had. And then, it kind of like fizzled out in the 2000s and he kind of got driven out of the country company, but
could be the country too. I don't know where he's at now.
And then I kind of feel like something similar is sort of happening with Bob Iger now, where it's like the company was booming and then Chapek came and then he came back in and everyone was sort of expecting like this return to form. And I feel like lately it's been more like about, there's been more cuts and things that like satisfying shareholders versus like satisfying like the people. And so it's like this interesting thing where
I think it's kind of the idea of, one person, if you have the same idea over and over again, it kind of gets stale. Like, I think that's what happened with Eisner. Like, he was great and like he did really expand the parks and made them a resort destination. Like, he kind of saw that vision. And even though we're going to talk about, the things that didn't succeed here, he had a lot of stuff that did. I mean, we still got additional parks. We still got international parks. But like to a point, that stops working. Like, that's working great when you're expanding until it doesn't. And then when it doesn't, you have to find something new. And I think like his move was, we'll just add hotels or add parks. And when that stopped working, they needed something different. And that's when Bob Iger kind of came in and was like, hey, all the properties are Pixar, not Disney, so we need to buy Pixar. We need to kind of build out our IP again to kind of fund the parks and bring people in. And then that worked. And it's like that kind of worked until maybe it didn't. Like the Fox acquisition, maybe that was one acquisition too far. And it's like they haven't fully been able to capitalize on that. And so, that plus streaming, it's like, okay, now it's kind of hurting the parks and things aren't working. And so, yeah, you got to find like, what's the next good idea that's going to keep you going for the next 20 years?
This isn't really on topic, but I was just kind of thinking about this based on our topic and what we're just talking about here. I do think that Disney is in trouble. And the reason why I think it's in trouble is that, when I'm talking to now, sometimes I'll bring up like 90s movies with students and I'll say, have you seen this? And the number of students that actually have seen some of the films is shocking to me. Some of it's very low. And so maybe if I named like more recent Disney movies, but not a lot really stick out.
What about like Moana? Moana, Frozen?
I think that, I'll have to do like a little, like maybe on Monday.
Like a poll?
Yeah, like a little
like
poll.
Zootopia, that
because
sort of
I
stuff.
think, but what I think is sort of happening is because there is so much social media, TikTok, things like that, that stuff is what the kids are spending their time on. Like you think of when we were kids, it was like, you want to watch media. You're watching
big worry for
the
Disney.
same tape over and over again.
They're trying to figure out, because that's the other problem
how
with
to
streaming.
like wheedle their way in.
Is, when they started, it was their competition is Netflix. But now their competition is YouTube and TikTok, almost more so than Netflix. And all the streaming services are like that. And they're trying to figure out, how do we get like user-generated content? I think ESPN is potentially looking at user-generated content on ESPN to try to get people to, go see your favorite YouTube talk show about sports on ESPN versus going to YouTube.
Well, I think that is also why they have that big collab with Fortnite, is because they know kids are on Fortnite, and so they're like, well, if they put these characters
Kevin
in Fortnite...
Feige said that like how many kids have come up to him and are like, oh, I first learned about Thanos from Fortnite, and then that got people interested in the movie. So yeah, it is interesting. Like the next CEO is going to have to the figure out how
to harness the younger people.
What's the big idea? Yeah, what's the big idea?
I think that there's certain things, like I think a lot of the kids are familiar with Bluey, so I mean I think that might be something a little bit. Because
at the end of the day, Disney knows how to do IP. They know how to make money off of it. So as soon as they figure out the idea of how do we capture the audience and get them hooked on an IP we have, like it's game over. Like that's all you need to do. Like you do that, and then you're golden. But Eisner, before him, Disney World wasn't Disney World. It wasn't this, multi-park, multi-day vacation destination. He kind of saw that. He pushed it. So this whole Disney Decade expansion, grand plans. At the same time, this is when they built Disneyland Paris, Euro Disney, as it was known. So they had Tokyo Disneyland. That was the first international park. They wanted to move over into Europe. It ultimately opened April 12th, 1992. When it opened, Disney was not the sole owner of it. So Disney does now own it completely as Disneyland Paris, but they were only 49% ownership when it opened. It almost was an immediate failure. Like from the opening, I actually found a New York Times article from November of 1992. So it opened in April. So this is November. So not even a year later. They quoted it as a $4.4 billion cost to build, which is very expensive. And they were saying that the net loss already was around $82 million. And Disney was already agreeing to delay its management fee. So much like Tokyo Disneyland, where Disney does not own that park at all. They get kind of paid a fee to license the characters and things. Disney was a part owner in Euro Disney, but they were getting paid a management fee to like help run it, and they were getting part of like the ticket sales and stuff. So within the first year, they were already agreeing to delay that payment because it was struggling so much financially. I think they were expecting something like 10 or 11 million guests is kind of what they thought they needed to make the park profitable. And like those first couple years, they were getting like 50 to 60% of what they needed. So it was never catching on. And it actually, it really didn't go well. I think it's doing better now, but like I was kind of surprised because I was finding articles talking about in 2020 and 2014 how the park was still struggling due to debt. And the reason like Disney owns it is because they agreed to infuse like billions of dollars into it to buy additional ownership to basically pay off that debt and put it on better financial footing, to the point where they took over it fully in 2018. So like it didn't start well, and it never really turned around either, and just kind of struggled from the very beginning.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know, like my only, sort of reference point with it is when we went, and it was a nice
And we
park.
went after Disney fully owned it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So.
But like, I mean, I can't comment on what it was like prior to that, if it was a mess or whatever, but like, yeah, it was a nice Disney park. And it is interesting because you would think, and I'm sure this is sort of where Disney was, where they thought, okay, Europe is a good market because you have a whole bunch of countries very close together. And so it's, people talk about how easy it is to sort of like travel between countries there. So you would think that then they would get a lot of people coming and, taking their families there. But I think maybe they underestimated, I feel like the European way is more like I don't know if this is true or just my perception of it, but it's like more outdoorsy sort of. So people don't necessarily want this like curated, like Disney type experience. Yeah. They're more like, hey, I'm going to go to Sweden and go hike in the Alps.
It's also more seasonal there too. I mean, it snows in Disneyland Paris. It's not like in Florida or California here where it is sunny and nice 365 days of the year. I mean, it gets cold there where you may not want to go, be in an outdoor park when it's snowing. So, I did not realize the struggle was kind of continued that far. And the other thing to think about too is when it opened, it was just the Disneyland park. There wasn't the Studios park there. There wasn't the, kind of dining, all the hotels. Like now it's built up more, you can kind of go there for a few days and actually kind of have a multi-day vacation. There's a reason to go and kind of stay for a few days. Whereas when it was just one park, it's maybe a tougher sell.
I also wonder, because I mean, when we went, I believe took like a train line to get there. Mm-hmm. I wonder if the train line went there or if you had to be.
I'm not sure.
I bet I would almost be willing to bet you it didn't exist.
I think it was Beat Fields. I'm pretty sure it was Beats.
Is what that was?
Is what it was. Is those old Beat Fields.
It's definitely pretty well outside of Paris. So if you think about it, if they don't have that transportation to get there, you're gonna have to go by car, and then again, like that kind of limits the amount of people, like the accessibility of it, because it's not like directly in Paris.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it didn't go well. They were planning for it to go well. And so, again, when something costs $4.4 billion to build, now, again, Disney didn't own all of it, so it's not like they paid all of that money. But that's a lot of money to be putting out, and then to have no income coming back because the park's operating at a loss. They're having to defer management fees, that sort of stuff, that it starts to put a strain on other parts of the company. And then you kind of couple that with Eisner's grand visions of, we are going to build anything anybody can think of that sounds like a good idea. We're going to build it as an attraction or a hotel, because just build it until we run out of money. They ran out of money for a lot of stuff and ended up, canceling a lot of things. And as we get into some of these too, like there were other reasons than just financially canceling them. But that was a big part of it. And I feel like, kind of why I put this together is because I feel like as we've gone through some other episodes, like we've touched on some of these things and we've talked about, oh, hey, it got canceled because Euro Disney wasn't doing well. And it's kind of like, after a while, I'm like, wait, there seems to be a lot of things that's doing this. So let's get into this here. So the first one is Beastly Kingdom. So this was a planned land within Animal Kingdom. And there are still dragons on the sign today that kind of harken back to there was going to be a Beastly Kingdom. And this one, we talked a little bit about this when we did the opening day series on Animal Kingdom a month or two ago. But basically, because of the financial struggles of Euro Disney, they basically told Imagineers, you can either have Dino Land or Beastly Kingdom. You have to pick one because Animal Kingdom's going over budget. We can't afford to do both lands. You have to pick one. And they picked Dino Land. I guess they figured maybe actual animals versus, having mythical animals there. But
extinct,
but at least animals that were real at one point versus like dragons and unicorns and stuff.
I do think that this is an interesting choice that they had. I'm guessing that they thought that there's probably more young people into dinosaurs when they're a kid. And so like that would be a more wide appeal. Like there's a lot, you hear about a lot of children having obsessions with dinosaurs. So like that would be a better fit. But I would love to see where their imagination would have gone with the mythical creatures. Like you think about, you know, going over to Universal Studios and you have Harry Potter over there. So you have like griffins and I'm trying to think of like what is it? The hippogriff? Like
Islands of Adventure had the whole Lost Continent originally where you had dueling dragons. Yeah. So it was the roller coaster themed around dragon. Like they kind of had that, and that's where Hogsmeade and stuff is now. But yeah, they kind of had that going in there.
I think that I understand why they picked dinosaurs, but it would be an interesting thing because the way that Disney is, and like how when they're doing a good job with things, like how much their imagination sort of soars to see what they could have done with mythical beasts.
Yeah, and I almost wonder if they chose dinosaurs as well as kind of like a demographic play, because I feel like young boys are into dinosaurs. And, you know, we've talked about this of like, and I think this was something Eisner did, focused on, but like you have young girls covered with princesses and all the Disney, like they were already kind of hooked on Disney stuff, but he's like, we need to expand to boys to have kind of like expand our demographics, our reach. And dinosaurs, I feel like, is a better fit than maybe like unicorns or something.
I mean, that maybe, that's maybe what.
And again,
it was.
I don't know. I mean, there is concept art around this Beastly Kingdom, and like the idea seemed to be like a boat ride. Like they had a unicorn in it. That's like the concept art you always see of kind of like that like glowing unicorn at the end of a boat ride. I think what's funny too is, you know, they went with Dino Land, and basically they had dinosaur and then a giant tent that you would like rent out for your parties, and they made it like a faux museum of like, here are some dinosaur bones. This is Dino Land. Like it wasn't the Dino Land we know today, or maybe, you know, 2 months ago.
We knew.
With all the other attractions. It's probably more the Dino Land we know today, where it's just dinosaur and then basically nothing else there. So yeah, even though they kept you know, Dino Land, it really wasn't that great. So the other thing that ultimately got canceled was a big redo of Tomorrowland over at Disneyland. So this was going to be called Tomorrowland 2055. And this was announced in the early 90s, and it was going to be this major overhaul of Tomorrowland. They were setting it in 2055 because that was the 100th birthday of Disneyland. And, you know, we've talked a lot about Tomorrowland and how it's kind of a difficult land for Disney because you want to update it with the newest technology, but, you know, the design process, the development process of this stuff takes a few years, and the way technology works, by the time you implement it, it's old technology. And so you're kind of always behind the times, and they really don't have a coherent kind of path. Like you look at the Tomorrowland and Disney World, and it's this very weird hodgepodge of Space Mountain and Tron, and then Buzz Lightyear, and then they had Stitch, but Stitch is gone. Like there's no super good theme to it. So the idea here, and I think this is interesting, and this is kind of out there, I feel like, for Disney, which I feel like is also maybe one of the reasons why they didn't do this. But in this future, Tomorrowland was going to be covered with these supernatural crystals. So it was like this whole crystalline structure, and it was this alien race that was going to be the inhabitants there. And so it was going to be basically a future where like aliens had come to Earth. They were planning to put Alien Encounter in Tomorrowland at Disneyland. Now they ultimately put it at Disney World, but it was originally, the design was to go to Disneyland. And they had this idea for a nighttime parade. It was called the Light Keepers Parade. And it was going to be like this whole tie-in that like at night there was going to be, I don't know if it was fireworks or lights, but it was going to kind of be an announcement that like a spaceship had landed in the park, and then these humanoid aliens were going to have this parade coming through. And I think it was like pretty deep in development. Like I think they even like playing some music for it and stuff. But ultimately, with like Euro Disney not doing well on the financial constraints, they kind of scrapped all of this. They did like a much smaller redesign of Tomorrowland in 1998, but nothing like this ambitious.
Yeah, there was this interesting idea that they had that, like you mentioned, like the landing of the spaceship. They had it was like a theater designed inside, and you'd walk up the gangplank of the theater, and then there were alien animatronic creatures inside, and then like a rotating thing, like it was
that
the
might have been the old like
Carousel of Progress.
Well, it might have
yeah.
been the old Carousel of Progress theater that it was in. Yeah.
Yeah, so they were gonna do this, and like you would meet this cast of alien characters, which at first kind of sounds weird, but then when you think about it, it's like sometimes weird works though.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of mourning the loss of this, because I think that it was either going to be really dumb or really awesome.
Yeah, and what's interesting is like it feels out there for Disney now because it's not IP driven, but you have to remember in the early 90s Disney didn't have Pixar, Star Wars, Marvel, like those. I mean, this is before Toy Story came out. I mean, this is before Pixar even really existed as Pixar. So like they would have had to create their own characters. So it would have been interesting to your point to see how it worked. I also think, though, with that theme, Alien Encounter makes a lot more sense. Like, it makes sense why they developed it if they were kind of going an alien-themed Tomorrowland. And then when this got canceled, they just randomly threw it into Walt Disney World. I think that was part of the reason why, like, hey, I'm on my family vacation. Let me go get terrified by an alien that's going to eat my child. Didn't maybe quite work quite as well.
Oh, that was fun. It was a great time in my childhood.
yeah, you were traumatized by it. But you could see, like, hey, if there's these humanoid aliens walking around, you're kind of, it's a different vibe, and you're maybe expecting something a little bit different.
Do you think that had this happened, they would have used that and updated it to be Star Wars? Like, do you think that maybe they would have taken some of those creatures and at least incorporating
like
those
down the road?
Yeah, like, okay, so this happens.
Like once they bought Star Wars?
Yeah, once they got Star Wars, like you would start to see in like the newer Star Wars movies, like some of the characters appear in the background.
Oh,
like that would be really cool.
I
and then they can start incorporating Star Wars characters into like the shows.
Well, that's what I was more thinking is if they kind of went this way with Tomorrowland and they started going towards, otherworldly alien future, does that just become Galaxy's Edge? Like instead of building a separate land for Galaxy's Edge, do they just turn that into Star Wars? Because you already have, I think at Disneyland, Star Tours, I believe, is in Tomorrowland now. So you could have kind of just built that in there. I'm not sure. Yeah, how they would have tied that in. Again, would it have even worked? Like, would they have done it and it just been a flop of like, this is just not Disney, and they would have had to quickly have changed it.
Yeah, like, but again though, like you say, they didn't have all of these other IP, and like think about the most beloved rides in Disney parks, and it's like, okay, Haunted Mansion was not IP driven. Pirates of the Caribbean was not IP driven.
No, you're
like,
right. But
a lot of these rides, they have made IP since because they've created movies to go with them. So it's like, okay, well, this alien thing, they could have created something after the fact if they wanted.
That's a little more hit or miss. Like, I think you can do ghosts, spooky. That's a common thing. Pirates is a common, like, aliens is just, you're right. It can go one way or the other, depending on how you design them, depending on how it goes. I really like the idea of this like nighttime parade though, that was like themed and tied into the land. Like that's something, because what's interesting is like with a lot of these things, we've talked about this, like Disney maybe cancels something, but it shows up again down the road.
Yeah, we're going to actually see that in a few minutes.
Yeah, but like, I don't know that we've ever really seen the idea of like theming a nighttime parade into somewhat of like an immersive parade almost, where it's like there's a story behind it to kind of draw you in. Like that's something that you would think they would have tried again somewhere. So
the closest thing to that I feel like we've ever seen in a Disney park is the strange hoedown that happens behind Country Bears Jamboree that we stumbled upon.
Yeah, I don't even know what that was. That was
There's like audience participation, and it was like Chip and Dale dancing.
Yeah,
it was
I don't even know.
Not Chip and Dale's dancers. Chip and Dale dancing.
I don't even know if that was real. If that was just a random thing that happened.
Did we have
or was it just a random thing that happened one day? Because I tried to look like, is this a scheduled entertainment? What's this called? No idea. And they just left. And everybody was like, shh, don't tell anybody we did this. That might have just been a random thing they did one day. So speaking of things that didn't happen, but parts of them did happen later. So this is getting to some of like grander plans. So this is a whole additional park. So there were a couple things, and we'll get to the other one here too, of a second gate at Disneyland. So again, Michael Eisner wanting to add parks, wanting to add additional gates. So the first idea in California was something called Port Disney, and it was at Long Beach, California. So it wasn't right next to Disneyland, but it was nearby. It was a 400-acre development. Disney actually purchased the Queen Mary, which was in the port there. So they actually had purchased that already, and so this whole development was going to be
Queen
around
Mary
the port.
is the ship, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So they owned that. They announced this in July of 1990, but it was canceled by December of 1991. So this predates the opening of Euro Disney, but obviously they were developing and building Euro Disney. It was going over budget. They were, having some financial issues. But this one was also a major factor of community pushback from people not wanting Disney to build this. Disney was going to have to, it was in a port. I think they were going to have to kind of bring in basically land and dirt to kind of build out a place to build on in the port. So there's environmental impacts and things. And it just became too many hurdles to overcome, plus the financial issues that they canceled this. But there was a lot of stuff in this. The main thing was they were going to build a theme park called Disney Sea. So they wanted to build like 5 hotels. They were going to have the Queen Mary, and they were going to have a theme park called Disney Sea as kind of the focal point of this. And that's interesting because there's a Disney Sea in Tokyo. Not exactly the same idea, but a lot of ideas that were going to go in this ended up in Disney Sea, which is fascinating because I never knew this. I thought Tokyo Disney Sea was like
just all their own design.
All original ideas, all that sort of stuff. I never realized that a lot of this stuff, dates back to something that could have been at Disneyland.
Yeah, it goes back to, what is it, the Mineral King, how the Mineral King ski resort that they were going to build in California, they ended up not doing that, but then they got Country Bears Jamboree, and then
it was designed for that. Yeah,
exactly. So it's a good idea doesn't die. So they recycle it.
This one had a lot of good ideas. So the center of the park was a 2-story aquarium, and it was supposed to be teach you all about the seas and aquatic life and stuff like that.
This was an outdoor aquarium. It sounds
I'm not sure. It
like
sounds
when you
like
say
it,
when you say the center of the park, it seems like it's a crown jewel of the park.
Yeah.
But how does that work? Like there's no way, it would have to be roofed off somehow, because I'm assuming that those fish would need the pH levels to be balanced, and you can't have rain or anything coming in.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So
I don't know. That's maybe I didn't think of that. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but
because I'm picturing just a giant circular tank with all these exotic
that's what
fish
I'm picturing too.
Swimming around. But logistically, I don't know that could be possible, because I know that those kinds of tanks are really fickle.
Yeah, it could have been in a building. I mean, it could have been a building inside, kind of like the Seas Pavilion. Like it could have been that kind of in the park.
I mean, I guess that they also could have had it in a building that was just designed to house the aquarium, and it been like a clear glass building that
right.
You can't even, you can either see into or you could enter.
But then some of the attractions they had for this, so they had a whole mysterious island section that was going to be themed around Atlantis with a volcano, and there was going to be an attraction within the volcano, which is basically exactly what they have over at Tokyo Disney Sea.
But it's 20,000 leagues under the sea.
Well, it's Jules Verne. It's Escape, Journey to the Center of the Earth is the volcano.
Yeah.
They also have 20,000 leagues, but I'm pretty sure that's called Mysterious Island. It's something very similar over at Disney Sea. So that was one thing they had there.
Which I think would have been really cool, because I think that the mythology of the lost city of Atlantis is fascinating. I think it's kind of like one of those mysteries where it's like, this was a place that supposedly existed. What was life looking like? And so that's one of those things that, those questions that I think that Imagineers really excel at running with. So to see their way of imagining that would be really fascinating and interesting. Yeah, it's just like giving them some sort of a problem to solve, and just letting them see what they can come up with. So I think that would have been, that's a loss there, but they do have it over in Tokyo Disney Sea, and it's amazing.
Yeah. The other thing they had was an area called Heroes Harbor, which was going to be attractions around like Sinbad and Ulysses.
Sinbad is over in Tokyo Disney Sea.
Yeah.
It was closed when we were there, though.
They have the Journey of Sinbad over there. They were going to have a boardwalk area, which actually inspired the American waterfront over at Disney Sea as well. So I found this absolutely fascinating. Like I had not heard of, the Disney Sea in California over here. I had not realized, again, just like how much of this stuff was actually planned. Like, it kind of makes sense now that they basically had this planned out, kind of scrapped it. Tokyo Disney saw it and they're like, hey, we want an expansion. With Japan obviously being an island, I think the sea is something that's like very ingrained in their culture. Tokyo Disneyland itself is right on the sea. The way they designed this park, it almost looks like the sea is going to come crashing in.
Well, don't they have
sometimes.
like a wall kind of
with like
blocking...
water leaking in that kind of makes it look like the sea is actually coming in to a certain extent. So it makes a lot of sense now that like, hey, they saw this, they took this, and then obviously just like plussed it to 1,000, because I can't imagine if Disney would have built this in California.
It wouldn't have been as good as it is.
This is the one, like, a lot of these I think would have been really cool, and it would have been really interesting to see see how Disney would have built it and how Disney would be different. And it's always fun to kind of think about like, oh yeah, what if they would have built Beastly Kingdom? Would we have gotten Pandora? Because they would have had Beastly Kingdom. Would they have needed that? What if they did this update to Tomorrowland and aliens were big in Disneyland? Like, how does Star Wars play into that? But like with this one,
or would we get a different franchise out of that like incorporates aliens? Because I do think that, again, like, you can argue about however you want about what Disney's done with Star Wars. I think they've done, some really great stuff, some not so great stuff, but I do think that in our pop culture, alien type stories, science fiction stories are lacking, and fantasy stories are lacking. So the more Disney can kind of get involved in those kinds of stories, and I mean, a lot of Disney animated things are fantasy, but science fiction a little bit less so. I think that those kinds of stories are the ones that just like expand your mind so much.
I think that could have been a very interesting land if done right. I think it would have been, they wanted to try to engage teenagers with alien encounter. I think you're right. Science fiction aliens. I think that could have engaged an older crowd there as well. But I'm super glad that Port Disney failed, because if Disney would have built Disney Sea, they would have not done it well. And Tokyo would have never built it because they would have wanted something more original. So I'm so glad Port Disney failed. Tokyo ended up building Disney Sea because it's like the greatest theme park ever made. But they took so many ideas from it. Like, I mean, I was reading this. I was like, okay, Mysterious Island with the volcano. Check. Attractions around Sinbad. I'm like, no way. Like, I thought Sinbad, like, they just made that up over there. Like, it was just mind-blowing. Mind-blowing over there. So they scrapped Port Disney. They ended up selling the Queen Mary back. And said, all right, that's not going to work, but we still want to build a second park over at Disneyland. The next idea they had was called Westcott. And now we did a whole episode on Westcott, so don't need to get into all the details here, but it is exactly what you think, a West Coast version of Epcot, beautifully named. But it was going to have a 300-foot golden spaceship Earth ball in the middle of it.
Wait, when you describe that, doesn't that seem like something that, like, 1,000 years in the future, they'd be like, how did they build this golden?
Yes. How did
aliens come down and help them build this?
The aliens from Tomorrowland 2055 helped them build it. 100%. So this was announced in 1991, because at this point they were basically figured out Port Disney wasn't going to work. It was canceled in 1995 because, again, the cost of this was going to be incredible. I think Spaceship Earth is like 170 feet tall, 160 feet tall, something like that. So this is almost double the height. So you can just imagine how big it is. So financial issues. They also had, the locals, because people are very close to Disneyland, being like, we don't want a 300-foot golden ball reflecting the California sun. Numerous issues there, but it's interesting that, like, their other idea for a second park was basically, hey, Epcot worked as a second park for Disney World, so let's just build a West Coast version of that over at Disneyland. So they were 0 for 2, in terms of expansion. They ultimately did Disney California Adventure, which then kind of needed a redo 10 years later because it wasn't kind of taking off. But yeah, it was interesting that kind of Euro Disney played a hand in derailing 2 expansions at Disneyland.
Okay, so hypothetical here. If we were to pick up one of the parks that, from East Coast and move it West Coast, which one of the parks do you think would be the best choice?
Well, I mean, basically Hollywood Studios is Disney California Adventure.
Okay.
Like, they're basically the same park. That's kind of what they also did at Disneyland Paris. Speaking of Euro Disney, the Studios park is basically Hollywood Studios. It's basically Disney California Adventure.
So of the other remaining parks, which one do you think would be?
Well, I think the question with that is that the best park to float around? Is like a Studios park the right park to have kind of everywhere? I think the way, like with Tokyo Disneyland, where they had a completely original second park, I think that's kind of the way to go. It's like, I think you'd be better off.
You have a staple park and then a unique one.
So you have a Disneyland Magic Kingdom park, and then if you look at Walt Disney World, they built Epcot, something completely original, something that was unlike anything anybody's ever done before, and it works. You can love it, you can hate it. Maybe you have your complaints about it, but it's something you've never seen before. It's different. Disney sees the same way. It's something incredible. It's unlike any other park you have there. I think the fact that like the other parks all have these studio parks, I think that's one of the reasons why like Disney California Adventure doesn't get the same, even though it's 100 feet away from Disneyland, the same number of people don't visit each of those parks every year. It's a dramatic difference because you can kind of get that park feel everywhere. I mean, Universal Studios parks are kind of like Hollywood studio parks, they're kind of a similar vibe, a similar layout. I feel like the better handle is make a more unique second park. Like it probably wouldn't have fit, but like put Animal Kingdom at Disneyland. And so now you have Disneyland and Animal Kingdom. That's something super original. It's something that they've never done before. And that's going to drive a lot of people's attention there because that's something you can only kind of get there. And then you can have something else at Disney World, but like that's almost, I think, what you need.
I kind of wonder, and I don't know, I don't know all the ins and outs of this, but I do wonder, there have been more unique in the past, probably like 20 years, zoo enclosure designs, like a lot more designs where like there are aquariums where there are tunnels through them and humans can go through the tunnels, and then the fish are above, or the polar bear can dive in above, so you can get a better view of the animals. I don't know what the regulations on that is, but it's like, why can't they build like tunnels through the tiger enclosure or something so that you can get up close and personal? Now that might cause fire escape issues or something. Right. People will go and sit behind if the tiger lays up against the thing. I'm sure that there are issues like that, but I almost kind of have to wonder if Disney could not design more unique zoo enclosure.
Like if they were doing Animal Kingdom nowadays, like what could they use? That has what's become more popular in the past 20 years that they could have done differently.
Or what could they innovate and say, okay, we're not going to have an enclosure that looks like this. Our enclosure is going to be a little bit more open for the animal, more like a safari, kind of like they did with, more like they did
with Kilimanjaro safaris. I feel like really innovated the enclosures there where nothing seems like an enclosure.
Yeah.
When you're on that attraction.
Yeah, and I think that they could probably do something along those lines with, just allowing people to move, like almost feel like they're moving through the actual enclosure on foot, without being obviously in any sort of danger from the animals, and obviously putting the animals themselves also in any kind of danger. So I think that would be an interesting park to, experiment with. On the West Coast.
So which one would you move to Disneyland?
See, I hate hearing your response first because I don't want to steal your response, but I do like your response of giving each park like the Touchstone Park, which is like the Magic Kingdom, the Disneyland, the Magic Kingdom, like all that kind of park, so that it seems like home, and then a park where it is more unique to the area. This is kind of what I thought that they were going to do with like the Marvel lands, where it was like, California was going to have their own version.
It's basically
and then
the same thing everywhere.
Maybe it would be like Wakanda somewhere else, and maybe it would be Asgard somewhere else. Like I think that if they had done something like that with Marvel Land, like that would be so interesting, because they could still use a lot of the same, even attractions, shows, just change some of the theming like around it.
Yeah, you should be excited to go to the different Marvel lands, but we went to Avengers Campus, technically what it's called, Avengers Campus in Disneyland when it opened. We were in Disneyland Paris shortly after their Avengers Campus opened. We checked it out, but it's like, it's so similar that you very quickly go, okay, I've already been here. Like, I've kind of already done this. There is one attraction that's different, that's kind of unique at each of them, but like, you should, to your point, want to be super excited of like, this was so much fun at this one. This has this special thing here that I want to go see, but it really doesn't it really doesn't have that. And there's no part of me, even though I'm a huge Marvel fan, that is like driven to be, I need to go back to these lands. I need to go see this one or that one, because there's nothing that just really pops in them.
And since we're kind of in that area, Black Spire Outpost is another one where it's like Galaxy's Edge
yeah.
should
it's
be
exactly the same.
Yeah, it should be different on East Coast and West Coast. Like, what if it was a different port?
I think they did that, and I think the fact that it's exactly the same and it's within the U.S., I think a lot of that was just because you don't get a lot of crossover between people that go to Disney World and Disneyland. And I also think some of that was just financial. They spent so much money building those attractions that they're like, we can't just build one. Yeah. We have to build two. But like with Avengers Campus, there's no Avengers Campus at Disney World. There's not going to be one for the foreseeable future unless something dramatic changes. Yeah, so why not make them different in the international parks versus the U.S. parks? My point even too, like even at Disneyland, at Disney California Adventure, there's just nothing that really like just pops and makes you like want to have to go back to Avengers Campus.
Mickey's Wheel of Death.
No, I'm talking about Avengers Campus. Yeah, like
it just you said that. It was already in my mind, coming out of my mouth.
I don't know, just the atmosphere of it. I mean, they have the shows and stuff like that, which are a lot of fun, but like, I don't know. I just feel like it's missing something. Like it's like 75% of the way there.
I will say the one thing that like draws me in every time. Well, there's two things that drew me in. One was the Spider-Man show that they have now taken some of the stunts out of the show, which I think that's. It wasn't like you're
there for the animatronic.
Yeah, I was gonna say I feel like sometimes the actor playing Spider-Man was really doing so like looking really good, and other times
maybe that's why they did
not
that,
so much
because it was kind of hit or miss on what you got.
But then the other thing for me that brings the land to life, the only thing that like really gets me excited to be there is the Dora Milaje. Like I love that, and seeing them like come through the park. They have such a presence. So. I mean, but yeah, like that's my favorite part of the land. It's not even any of the rides. It's the Dora Milaje.
Yeah. It's really sad that Avengers Campus budget got cut dramatically because of Euro Disney's failures in 1992. Who knows? It could still have had a lingering effect. We don't know.
Butterfly effect.
Yeah, but that's not one we're talking about. So yeah, so two potential expansions at Disneyland got canceled. And then the last thing was a new theme park in Virginia called Disney's America,
which I think we also did an episode.
Yeah, we
about.
did, and this was kind of like
it was like a history park.
Yeah,
wasn't
it was an ambitious project in that it was based on American history. It was near Washington D.C., and so it was kind of this whole idea of American history, colonial times. There was going to be an attraction called the Muppets Take America, which would be pretty cool.
That would be pretty cool.
They also were talking of either replicating or moving the American Adventure or the Hall of Presidents from Disney World to this park. That might be the one benefit for you because you're not a fan of the American Adventure attraction.
Absolutely, I'm not.
So if they would have moved that, maybe we would have gotten something new in Epcot there. But yeah, we did an episode on this, and when we talked about it, we don't need to really get into all the details now, but like, this is probably good it didn't happen because there was some problematic things when you're dealing with American history and how Disney kind of planned to deal with some of this stuff of our early history and things. And it's like, I could kind of see why maybe this wasn't a great idea. And I think that's some of the reason this got canceled was kind of like, I don't know that people want I think one of the ideas was like having people involved in like a Civil War battle, which just, first of all, is a weird thing to be involved in a theme park, and then just everything that kind of goes along with that. So there was some problematic stuff there. Again, people in Virginia and DC didn't want it. They kind of realized, oh, hey, it snows. This park's probably going to have to be closed 4 or 5 months out of the year. That's kind of not our MO. The financial issues with Euro Disney. So this was announced in 1993. And then again, within a year, September of 1994, it got canceled.
I could see this being like next to the Smithsonian or something. Like, you know, you're going
I think that's
in
why
and
it was near DC.
you're going to, you know, visit things that are like national history, but like, you know, take your kids, whatever. But I just don't, I don't know if this is something that Disney needed to get
It was a weird
involved
idea. It was a
in.
weird idea to begin with.
I think that they definitely, I know like Walt was very into like, you know, his American heritage and like patriotism and things like that. And that's why some of those things are in the park. So I'm sure that, you know, it was well meaning, but it's just not really the
I think
best
the Hall
fit.
of Presidents, I think the American Adventure, I think those are good attractions. Like you have attractions about this
One
stuff,
of those two things is.
but you have the attraction. I don't think you need a whole theme park. Again, just some of the ideas were kind of out there. I'm actually surprised they never went anywhere with the Muppets Take America.
Yeah.
Of doing a Muppet show, of even eventually replacing the Hall of Presidents and just making that Muppets or the American Adventure and making that Muppets. Like I'm surprised they never really went anywhere with that.
I actually am all in on that one.
Yeah.
Do the Muppet, like that's how you can make the American Adventure relevant. Like,
and people they want the Muppets still in the parks. Like it's a cool way.
Yeah,
to
it would
make
be a cool way to like take them from that one to the other, and then give like you could still talk about American history, but make it fun and
with the Muppets.
With the Muppets,
exactly.
like
it would be awesome.
Yeah,
so.
that would. All right, I'm all in on that.
Yeah. So I think we can still maybe get something good out of this one, but I think this is one where it's a good thing it got canceled.
Correct.
And I think there were other reasons why it got canceled. So the other thing that's interesting and kind of why I bring this up is look how much Disney announced in the 90s. They had these grand plans for expansion. It's very similar to the decade of expansion they just announced recently, where we're going to spend $60 billion over the next decade.
Oh, no, don't say that,
and we're going to put new attractions in all the parks and new shows and new cruise ships.
No, don't say that.
And I think they want to do that, but you know, sometimes financials change. Maybe one project doesn't go so well. Now, here's the thing. They're not building a whole new park, which is good. I think that's, you know, if you were just building attractions and you weren't planning to build second gates everywhere and, you know, expanding like that, that's obviously a bigger financial constraint when you're putting billions and billions of dollars into stuff. But like, you kind of have to, you know, look at Disney's history and see they've kind of done this before. So I'm hopeful that they build everything they announce, but, you know, we could be looking at stuff of like, hey, this maybe just quietly got canceled a year or two, after.
This reminded me of D23 like several years ago, where they announced a million things, and
the
then
whole
they didn't end up doing
redo,
any of it.
and just kind of quietly.
I wasn't thinking about them going forward. They're not going to do that to us because there's a lot of cool things coming.
It's funny though, just how much of this stuff was announced and canceled within 12 months.
Yeah.
That they're like, hey, we're doing this. No, we're not. Hey, we're doing this. No, we're not. Like it was funny. So, but so interesting of just how much you can point to one specific park. Like it's rare in the history that it's like one thing has this much of an impact that it
just helps all the dominoes to fall.
If any one of these things would have happened, the course of Disney park history would be radically different today than what it is. So just really interesting to kind of look back and see all this stuff. So, but that wraps up the show for this week. We'd love to hear from our listeners. What's the one canceled attraction that you would most like to see? If you're watching this on YouTube, let us know in the comments below, or you can let us know on Instagram. We're at Enchanted Ears Podcast over there. But I want to thank everybody again for listening. If you've not done so, please leave us a rating or a review, subscribe, wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps, and we really appreciate it.
Thanks for lending us your ears.
Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you here next Monday.
Bye-bye.